Sure. Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings. And joining me today for a first-time guest, he's the host of the NWA podcast with Nate Milton over on Post Wrestling. He's also a professor of political science at Cal State University Fullerton. He's Dr. Kris Ealy. Kris, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. I'm great, Jesse. Sorry, I got a little tongue-tied. Great, Jesse. I love the work you do at WrestleNomics. I'm a big fan of the Gentleman's Wrestling podcast, so I will try to practice as much gentlemanly etiquette as I can.
Yeah, I don't know if we were really conducting gentlemanly etiquette on the show. The name of the show is only exists because I originally wanted I was really like fascinated. I wanted to do like these deep dives on specific subjects, almost like you're reading like this long New Yorker portfolio
Right.
on
Yeah.
something. And so
Mhm.
I just, when I was me and my former co-host Jason Unpresser, when we were coming up with the concept of the show, I was like, yeah, like gentlemen's wrestling podcast, if only because I wanted to separate it from like the hot take culture that many podcasts have and wanted
Right.
to be
Yeah.
like specific.
And
And
yeah, and I don't get that. Yeah, I don't get that impression from you at all when I listen to your show. That's why I like because there's a lot of people in our space that exist just to be rabble rousers, so to speak, and to say offensive things just for clicks and listens and all that. So
yeah, and it's
yeah,
it's it's not even like necessarily like the people that are like there's also like an element like of people that just get worked up, and it's not necessarily like
right.
because they're looking for attention or something like that. It's just that's their style. And I don't want this to
Mhm.
be like a thing where people are screaming at each other or someone's getting really worked up about something. I want it to be uh more gentlemanly. One day I'll do a live episode with several guests, and we'll all be sitting in like
Yeah.
we'll all be wearing tweed coats and be sitting in a like a gentleman's club room and smoking pipes, and
Right.
we'll
Yes.
discuss the latest wrestling news with fake British accents. Um,
Right.
but the reason I wanted to have Kris on the show today was um, I wanted to talk about something that has really been fascinating to me for a long time, and it was kind of hammered home last month when Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics, of course, I imagine most listeners of the show are hopefully familiar with WrestleNomics. Um, but Brandon published a chart that was um, looking at kind of the different various demographics of pro wrestling fans and kind of basically looking at who was watching each, major pro wrestling show that's telecast in the United States. And he had breakdowns for, economic background, he had breakdowns for educational background, and he had breakdowns on racial backgrounds. And he had some really and that was something that really fascinated me. So I'm gonna attempt to screen share here for so just so the listeners or the viewers on video can see it. Um, let's see. Let's see if I can share screen. Right, I can do that. Yes, I think that should be quite right. Um,
Right.
so as people can see, this is the chart that Brandon produced, and it has the racial breakdowns of every single show that's on American television for the most part. Um, and the big thing that jumps out to me, really like kind of like the only thing that jumps out to me because these are very similar, is the
Mhm.
percentage of WWE's audience that is black versus the percentage of AEW's audience that is black, which is um in particular with Dynamite, which is for people who are listening and not seeing this chart. AEW's Dynamite audience is 68% white and 16% black. That's according to Nielsen data, which is not infallible, but at least gives us something in the ballpark.
Right.
And for instance, Monday Night Raw's audience is 59% white, 25% black. They're about the same in percentage of Hispanic audience, about the same in percentage of Asian audience, and about the same in other races. It's really the difference between the racial breakdowns between the two companies
Mhm.
is the black viewers seem to prefer WWE or are not tuning into Dynamite at the same rate that maybe white viewers are. And
Right.
one of the many reasons why I think this is important is that how often do we have conversations about how can AEW grow? How can AEW create new fans? How can they get more people to become invested in their product that can go to live shows, that can buy pay-per-views, that can buy merchandise, all of that stuff. And one of them I'm looking at right here is that clearly there is a percentage of black fans who are, loyal WWE viewers that for whatever reason are not tuning into AEW, particularly AEW Dynamite. And I wanted to kind of explore some of the reasons maybe for that and kind of also maybe what are some things that they can do. And Kris, you were on an episode of WrestleNomics with John Pollock and Brandon
Mhm.
Thurston, and you talked about this very issue um, in December. And I thought you did a great job on that. So I wanted to invite you on the show. And I guess for starters, when you first saw this chart, what was kind of your reaction to that in terms of did it check out? Did it make sense? Did it confirm some things you already thought? What did it kind of say to you?
A little bit of everything. Yeah, it confirmed some things that I already thought. It also told me that AEW, this is something that we've talked about on the NWA podcast, and I've written about for WrestleNomics. And it's just they do not have they do not have their finger on the pulse of Black America, probably. WWE, I don't think they really do either. I just think that it's more of what people know and more of what people are used to, you know. And anytime you're the number two, um, I think just as a general rule of thumb, the masses are going to gravitate towards the number one. So, and if you're like a casual fan, AEW might just seem second rate. I do think with the ascension of Swerve Strickland, and if they can do have more people like him on the rise, I think the company will rise as a whole. But there's really not been a whole lot of black wrestlers in AEW to really get invested in to sink your teeth in into, so to speak, right? It's like you've got talented guys like Scorpio Sky, but it always seems like they hit a ceiling or hit a wall. They get a push, and then for some reason it's not there anymore. Ricky Starks, I thought he was going to be the guy for a long time, and then all of a sudden he's derailed, and now he's not in a horrible position. It's just by this time this year, like last year, I thought this guy would be at least in the conversation for the world title, and now he's, you know, in a tag team, a makeshift tag team at that, which, you know, is fine, but it's just, if you do a lot of that stuff, what you're doing is you're telling your audience that this guy is not a priority or is just not as important as other people we care about. So that's why the way they handle Swerve in this moment right here is going to be so important to the way black fans receive them, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and this is a problem. I think there's elements of it too in WWE, but it's a problem I think
Yes.
across the board in AEW in terms of AEW seems to allow wrestlers to show a lot of potential,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a struggle to follow up and push those people all the way. And so when you
Right.
talk about wrestlers like Ricky Starks or Swerve, um, who are guys who have shown a lot of potential, um, and then they whether they feel like they hit a ceiling or they feel like that they feel like they were in the driver's seat and then they're kind of pushed into the back seat. I think that's a kind of a universal problem. I think one of the major things going back to AEW's foundation is that if you look at AEW's original roster for
Mm-hmm.
when they first debuted on TNT, it was a very white roster. and
Right.
all of the most prominent names for the most part were white. And there
Right.
really wasn't, outside of Scorpio Sky, there really
Mhm.
wasn't like any black talent to be seen. I'm trying to even think of anyone else that was on that original
It
roster.
was Private Party. They gave them a match with the Young Bucks
Right.
and
I was actually at that match now I think about it.
yeah,
But you're
yeah,
right.
and
But they
Private
were a
Party.
completely unproven, like, I mean, I don't even think, I think I'd seen one match of them prior to
Yeah, and
the
you could
match.
almost tell when you watch that match with Private Party and the Bucks and Private Party wins the match. You could almost tell it was like kind of a charity win. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna let these guys win, and then they just do absolutely nothing after that. Like you said, they were just unproven, you know?
Yeah. And I think I don't know if that's necessarily like AEW's fault. Like there just wasn't, they
Yeah.
could sign the talent that was available to them. It was the same way with the women's division, where the women's division was certainly pretty weak in terms of names. And it was because, well, you know, if there was, and this is a longer standing issue, I think, in the wrestling industry across the board, but if there was, you know, the black version of Chris Jericho or the black version of Cody Rhodes that was out there to be signed, I think AEW would assign them. The problem was there was a limited amount of people to be signed. And I think that when AEW starts, that sets kind of a stigma where people who were, you know, I forget how many people actually tuned into the first episode of Dynamite. I think it was like 1.1 million or 1.3 million, something like that. When people are sampling the show for the first time and they're making that judgment whether or not I'm going to watch the show, and the show is very white. There's basically
Yeah.
only one black wrestler of note at all. A lot of
Yeah.
those people might tune out. Now, since then, I think AEW has done a good job, at least in being active in signing black talent that has come available to them. They signed Ricky Starks when he was available. They signed Swerve when he was released from WWE. They went out and they got Keith Lee.
Mhm.
Um, I definitely think that they're active in that sense, but I think what you have is you have now that talent being caught in kind of what you were talking about earlier, Chris, which is taking someone who has promise and really elevating them to the top level of the
Yeah.
company, which really, if you look at the 4 years of AEW, the only two wrestlers I would say that have cracked the top echelon of the company that didn't start there were MJF and Hangman Page. And Hangman,
Mhm.
you could argue, was kind of already there. He, you know, he main evented their Full Gear pay-per-view and was Jericho's first challenge for the original challenger for the first title and things like that. But really over 4 years, there's only been one guy who I think has climbed up to the highest level in the company, and that's MJF. And
Right.
at this point, there's probably room for more, and that means there's probably room for more diversity as well.
Yeah, it's weird with AEW because it always does seem like they're waiting for like free agents to get released. Um, and I think that is fine. It's just while you're doing that, you need to be pushing the next generation of stars. MJF is you know, his rise has been kind of meteoric. And I I think with AEW sometimes when I watch it, um, and this is probably the difference between AEW and WWE, and I don't have any like data driven this is just an assumption, this is anecdotal. So please take it as such. But sometimes when I watch AEW, as a general rule of thumb, I like AEW better than I like WWE, but there is a lot of like clown crap on AEW sometimes that I just cannot relate to. And I think, and I look at it as I like a lot of black things, urbane things, and when uh, MJF and Adam Cole when they were like doing the angle where they're they're like at a miniature golf course or whatever. Maybe it was frisbee golf. I don't even remember. And
The vignettes
like,
with MJF and Cole, which were
yeah,
very
that's
goofy.
yeah, that was so clownish and goofy. Um, and I talked to some of the black podcasters, and I think some of us were split because some liked it, and there were others that didn't like it. It wasn't universally liked by the black people in this space that I was talking to, and I do think that's going to be an issue as well, because say what you want about WWE, there are things like that that don't necessarily appeal to me or appeal to and I don't think there's been anything like blatantly that clownish um on their television. We'll talk about R-Truth in a minute probably, but that kind of thing with the main event talent,
Right.
um
And I
it,
think, right, that's a big point, which is we're talking about Adam Cole and MJF, which is like the most pushed angle in the entire company.
right,
Like
yeah,
NXT
yeah,
is full of goofy vignettes like that. Um,
yeah.
but you're right, it's not something that like Cody Rhodes is doing or Roman
Right.
Reigns or the true top talent. And it's funny, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think those were uh like those, like you talked about those MJF and Cole vignettes, and those are definitely kind of, I think a lot of people, at least in my space, had really negative feelings towards them. And
Yeah.
then you bring them up as kind of like this clownish thing. And in hindsight, like now I'm looking at them like those are extremely white vignettes. Like they're just like this goofy,
Yeah.
like we're gonna go out, we're gonna try Chinese food, and it's gonna be too spicy or too hot
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us or something like that. And it's like, and that isn't, because you're right, this is the major angle that the company is promoting. It's not like this little like 2-minute thing that is just
Right.
not
Yeah.
gonna spoil anything. This is the relationship the company is hoping you invest in the most because it's being
Right.
presented as that.
Like, and I was looking at a chart, I want to say a, a month ago or so, and they were talking about top 10 shows. They surveyed black people, white people, top 10 shows amongst black people, white people, and stuff. One in the black shows, it was very interesting. It was one of the shows that was in the top 10 was Three's Company. For this is I wish I had the chart on me, but it was like this is one of the top 10 shows that black people like is Three's Company. And I think like when you're doing these things, it's about attracting the black audience. It's more than just having black talent. It's having talent that even black people can relate to in some significant way. And different shows get penalized for different things, like the like if you take Friends for example, Friends is always getting criticized for being extra white, no diversity, barely having black people even as background characters, but they did have like a few prominent ones towards the latter seasons. And I just think the reason why black audiences shut off of Friends, and I'm getting to a point with wrestling, I just have to tell this anecdote real quick, um is that um I think Friends represents like an idealized version of white society that I don't think a significant amount of black people can relate to on that level. With Friends, it was kind of like they live in this New York City white-topia, only interact with other white people, tell a lot of like very white jokes. And it's a funny show, but I don't think I think that show kind of tells the black audience without telling the black audience that this show isn't for you. And I think AEW was suffering from a little bit of that. To be fair to AEW, they weren't it was what was going on with them in some cases was not fair. people in the wrestling media. I'm I'm friends with Alfred Konuwa. I know him from out here in LA. He just write the most. And I've told this to him to his face. He just write the most trash articles on AEW, where I thought he was kind of like not being fair to them as a company, accusing them of things that WWE itself has been doing for decades. So they had that going against them as well. And just the perception. And at the time when a lot of goofy stuff was going on in AEW, WWE was they were kind of pushing black wrestlers, whether you want to say if they were salient pushes or not, but they were at least there. Now I think they're back in a lull, but at least during that time period, you had Bobby Lashley as the champion. You had Big E challenge him. Uh, the Kofi Kingston stuff happened at the tail end of 2019. So there were things that like told that signaled to black people this is a show for you. And I think that now they're WWE right now with the main roster, at least they're just clearly not in that season at the moment. And it ebbs and flows, I guess I should say.
Yeah, I think I think you made a really interesting point there in terms of uh not like obviously like if you're looking for like a solution, it would be like, well, just push more black people, right?
Right.
But I think you touched on something really interesting that I've never thought about, and like I think it's a great reason why I wanted to have you on the show is like certain characters that they don't have to be black, they don't have to be white, but if their stories or their characters are presented in a certain way, they can, as you said, like tell people, black people, that this is not for them without, you know, expressly saying it. And I do think that like if you compare like MJF's character or
Mhm.
Adam Cole's character to say Roman Reigns's character or Cody
Right.
Rhodes's character, those guys are probably seemingly more relatable to black viewers than like
Yeah.
MJF's character.
And they 100% are. That's kind of an issue as well. And it's I mean, I think this like Samoans and black people are kind of tied at the hip out here, especially in California. I've got plenty of Samoan friends, plenty of Pacific Islander friends, um, and our cultures are very, very similar. So automatically, when you see like Roman Reigns and main event Jay and all that stuff, even if it's not the greatest at the moment, it's still something that the black every man or every woman can kind of relate to. If it was interested looking at the top 10 and top 20 merch sellers that Thurston posted a while ago, and no black people were on those lists, and this is for strictly WWE. And this kind of speaks to, you have to make these people, if the I think people will buy the merch of people if they feel important. And I don't think anybody on the WWE roster at the moment feels important, of any black folks on the WWE roster feels that important at the moment. And I think that kind of attributes to low merchandise sales. With AEW, it's just, I think Tony Khan is used to the wrestling that he's used to. And when you're the only person booking the show, I don't know if he's who he's getting advice from. I know he hired Will Washington to write a while back. I casually know Will Washington. We're not besties or anything, but hopefully he's getting advice from uh minds like Will Washington when he's booking these shows, because it really sometimes just doesn't seem like um though any black wrestlers are prioritized. And the thing with when you're dealing with demographics and people, they want their groups represented. You know, they want to feel like they're a part of something. And then if you're and then the overall show as a whole, like you were saying, Jesse, people are not just gonna watch your show just because you're pushing a random black talent. It's gotta be a black talent that relates to people. Like again with the Swerve stuff right now, um, it really does feel like he's on the precipice, the cusp of something. And that's really what we want to feel when we watch these shows.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. For starters, just historically in wrestling, the key bookers, the key writers have almost always been white. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and even now today, outside of Will Washington, I don't know if I can name another um black man or woman who's in a creative position in either AEW or WWE. I'm sure WWE has some, they have the whole writer's room
Yeah.
of people, so I'm sure there's somebody there. But in terms of like major people that we know, whether it's Paul Levesque or Shawn Michaels or Bruce Pritchard, like
Yeah.
and historically it's pretty much always been the case that this has been an industry that's been dominated by the creative visions of white men, typically older white men.
Right. Yeah.
And
If I interject for a second,
go for it.
um, WWE, like I am, if they've got a black person in the writers' room right now that is writing that bullshit. Excuse the language. I don't know what.
No, it's okay. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, that's writing that bullshit with our truth. Um, and they're telling them that is the way to go. I think they really do not have a handle on the black audience or don't even care to have one. I critically think about everything. That's just my what I do as an educator, right? I don't just watch things and just accept them for what they are. This stuff with our truth, in my opinion, and you can at me, send all your hate tweets to me, is so antiquated and dumb that it really kind of turns my stomach when I watch it. You've got this black character on the show in an angle where he's trying to be friends with the cool kids. A couple of them are white, a couple of them are Hispanic, Latino. Um, and it's just every week this guy is like delusional to think he's in with the cool kids, and he's not, and people are laughing at him for just being a dumb guy, and I am waiting for it to go somewhere. And then the arguments that I see online from people is, well, our truth doesn't have a problem, so you shouldn't have a problem with it as well. That would be cool if it only affected our truth. When I see crap like this, it affects the race, you know? So if I honestly don't care how much our truth loves this. If he loves it, good for him. Keeping on. But you really got to think of the way that you're represented at the moment. And you got to think of the kids that are watching this that are like trying to aspire to be WWE superstars, and it's horrible, horrible, horrible stuff in my opinion. Um, and I haven't. I'm open to arguments that says it's not, but I haven't heard a good one. So I had to get that off of my chest with the R Truth stuff. Um, and this is WWE has a history of doing this crap. It's not just that they do offensive crap. They do offensive and insulting crap. AEW, for all their faults, they're and they have a lot of faults. Mainly being that they treat the women like they're just there. They treat the blacks sometimes like they're just there, but they're not representing them in a embarrassing light the way WWE sometimes does. And I thought we were over that once Vince McMahon got out of power, and it seems like we're still doing that shit. Sorry for the rant, but I
No,
had to
because I
just get
think
that out
there's
there.
a really something that I just I don't know, and there's plenty of reasons. Uh, there's plenty of reasons why this is like that, why this exists like this the way it does. But there is the lawsuit from last year, um,
Mhm.
by a
The
former W.
antitrust one, or the Abraham
Yeah, so this is
Stanford
Brittany
Abraham,
Abrahams, who was a former
Brittany Abraham.
WWE staff writer. I think she
Yeah,
was the only black woman on the WWE staff or on the Raw writing team or whatever what team she was on.
right.
Um, and she had a lawsuit that had some pretty bad stuff in it in terms of her interactions with the head writing team.
Hmm.
And I think one of the key things was the writing team was really they really wanted Bianca Belair to say this line, which was like, "Don't make me
Yeah,
take my earrings off and beat your ass" or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. It was some real stereotypical black woman line. That was, yeah, I
Yeah,
remember.
and I think Bianca was like, I don't talk like that, so like I don't
Hmm.
think that really fits my character."
Yeah,
Um, and Brittany Abrahams was very, sympathetic, being like, "Yeah, we should come up with something different." And one of the head writers said something. Again, this is according to the lawsuit, which has since been dropped, but
hmm,
um, he said something like, you know, like he rolled his eyes, was like, "You guys make it very. We don't know how to write for black characters." Like he just said that.
right.
Um, and I was like, "Whoa, that's pretty big that a WWE writer said that." And then, unfortunately, if you look at like what major creative direction Bianca Belair has had over the last year or so, I would say that it seems very truthful to say that they don't know how to write for black woman characters because she really hasn't had anything interesting to do, I think.
Yeah, no,
Um,
yeah,
and
she's. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and I was just gonna throw in, I was like, we know that, Mercedes Monet and Trinity quit the company. I guess Trinity's contract expired, but Mercedes walked out of the company.
Hmm.
Um, because of creative differences. Maybe that had to do with Vince McMahon or whatever, but those are your two most prominent, black female performers. Mercedes was probably one of your most prominent performers, period. Uh, when she walked out. And then even this, Jade, they had Jade around, but they haven't done
Yeah.
anything with her.
Right. And
And
then Triple H in that press conference says that, they it was pretty much saying she didn't learn anything in AEW. That's what I heard. I know that's not what he said, but it's like, what is she gonna learn in NXT that's gonna better prepare her for main roster? I think Jade Cargill at the moment, she's the wrestler that she is. I don't
mhm.
I don't think she's gonna get any better or worse. I don't think she's like horrible, but I don't. If they're trying to make her become another Mercedes Monet, that they do not understand what she is as a wrestler. She is who she is. Either shit or get off the proverbial pot, because this is who you have, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think every wrestler needs to be Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson. I think if you've got her, push her, do something with her. Because that, again, that's kind of like you were saying about Bianca. She's just been sitting in this weird limbo at the moment,
Yes, she
and
hasn't been like killed or anything. It's
yeah,
not like she's been buried and forced to lose a bunch of matches, but even
yeah,
when she was champion, she just didn't seem to have a real creative direction.
Mhm.
She had
Yeah.
matches and she won most of them and she retained her title for a long time. But there's like, what's her storyline? What's she doing? It's just she's kind of just like this, popular, talented, over wrestler, but doesn't seem to have a lot of creative direction. And coming off of the lawsuit and just looking at what are the black women in this company doing? And as you
Yeah.
mentioned, if you can throw in the black men for a lot of cases, like Bobby Lashley, what's he up to? Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's a problem. And with Jade, I mean, to me, the whole like, oh, Jade isn't like a good enough wrestler for us to have on TV is total nonsense. WWE put some
Yeah.
absolutely awful, especially on NXT. There are some people that have had like under 5 matches that are on TV. I
Yeah.
think Jade is maybe turned out to be maybe like a little disappointing in terms of in-ring ability, but you can't tell me that she's not better than many of the people that are on TV. We
Right.
just
Yeah.
saw we just saw Nia Jax have a 12-minute match on Raw. Okay, like
Yeah.
Jade can't work squash matches on TV, and I think it was a lost. I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with her, but I think she had a lot more momentum when she just made the jump from AEW to
Yeah,
WWE.
yeah. That this pause has definitely been a momentum killer. And I've gotten into arguments on my own podcast with like my friend Andrew Thompson, one of the co-hosts. You can't do this to people. If you're not gonna debut her, just I would have perfect been I would have been perfectly content with her debuting at the Royal Rumble, putting her on ice for a few months. But when you show her on TV and you announce this signing and then you just do nothing with her, all she's doing is walking around backstage. Um, and we're waiting for her to do something. It's a momentum killer. It doesn't give me hope for her in the future. It reminds me of when that Joey Legend guy, I don't know if this is probably before your time, but this guy Joey Legend, he was they called him Just Joe in WWE. He's this big indie guy that was supposed to debut, and everybody was like, "Oh yeah, Joey Legend, he's coming to WWE." And all they did were backstage vignettes with the guy, and then he never shows up. I see this kind of being a repeat of what's going on with Jade at the moment. And like you said,
She
there are
was
people on NXT. Yeah,
Yeah,
what's that?
she was getting out of limos. And I think they were
Yeah,
trying to do this thing where like, oh, is she on Raw? Is she on SmackDown? Is she could be on NXT? Like, where's she going?
yeah,
And then I mean, she's fallen off the face of the earth the last month. I don't
yeah.
think anyone's seen her anywhere. So,
Yeah, yeah. I did see her on a video where she was, I think she gave Nelly the rapper like a title belt or something,
yeah,
and that was
she was at one of like I think she was at like the Big 12 championship game with like it was like the
yeah,
Undertaker, Jade, and like two other people, which I was like, I wonder
yeah.
what all these people talked about like backstage before they were
Yeah, I know,
debuting.
right? It's like some kind of motley crew right
Yeah.
there.
But and you're right, it was kind of a weird thing to like you either have her debut at the Rumble and it's like this big deal when she makes a surprise, entrance. Um, but now you kind of set the stage where she's like, oh, you teased her doing something and then she's gone. And it's just kind
Hmm.
of a and to me this has nothing to do with her wrestling. It has to do with not having a plan for her. I feel
Yeah,
like that's the key.
and it, and that's the problem with wrestling as well. And I think it affects the black talent worse than it affects other talent. TK was going through that as well. It's like you signed Swerve, you signed Athena, you signed um uh, Keith Lee, you signed all of these talents, and now they're just kind of there and really not doing anything. It it becomes like, are you just are we just hoarding talent at the moment, or are you signing these people with a plan in place for them? And I mean, it doesn't just affect black talent, but the problem with this is there's way more white talent than black talent. So even though it affects some white talent too, when it affects black talent, they get hurt more than white talent because white talent is always going to get pushed, right? um And I think that point is missed on a lot of people who watch wrestling. And like I was telling you earlier, I critically think about all of this stuff. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's CM Punk getting fired or how wrestlers are pushed. I always think of the optics of the situation when Bianca Belair, when she lost to Becky Lynch in, what was it, 30 seconds or something at that SummerSlam.
Mhm.
I think of the optics of that. You know, you could say, oh, this is just the storyline and this and that. But the bottom line is this is a Black woman wrestler on your show when there's not a lot of Black women wrestlers on your show at the moment, and she is played to be a sucker and lose like that, and just I don't know what questions these people ask themselves when they're pushing talent like that. I think this is where like consultants gonna play, is asking them, is this offensive, if is this not offensive, or if it is offensive, at least how do we bring it to a place where it won't be offensive anymore, you know? And that's my whole thing. I don't necessarily mind like taboo subjects in wrestling, but it's got to be going somewhere. It can't just be taboo and racist and antiquated and dumb just for being for the sake of being taboo, antiquated, racist, and dumb. It's got to be leading us to a destination.
You mentioned something about like, especially with AEW and Tony Khan, kind of the wrestling that Tony Khan is familiar with, which
Mm-hmm.
and I've been thinking about this in terms of uh again, if you look at these charts, I think 14% of the United States is African American.
Mm-hmm.
So even Dynamite with its 16% black audience is over indexing with the black
Right.
audience. And WWE obviously is doing tremendously well. So in general, wrestling is very popular with black people, just
Mm-hmm.
as a general rule. But and I have no data for this, and I'd be interested in hearing your perspective. Just
Yeah.
anecdotally, like indie wrestling, like whether it's Ring of Honor or PWG or any of these other indie promotions that have existed, despite the fact that wrestling in general is very popular with black people, those atmospheres I've experienced have been overwhelmingly white, far more than if you were to go to a WWE show or even
Right.
an AEW show. And I do wonder if AEW, which is, in a lot of ways an evolved form of the American indie scene from the 2000s and 2010s, and was kind of, grew up as this niche thing that people, you know, talked about on the internet, if that plays a role in kind of it's this niche nerdy white person thing and not
Right.
this maybe more mainstream
Mm-hmm.
uh thing that connects with across many different racial demographics.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. And I haven't watched ROH or anything like that in a while, but yeah, I could definitely see that because that does happen. You know, that's a thing that happens in wrestling, especially with like indie shows and in shows that are kind of it's really like, because the idea is attract, you don't want to necessarily abandon your current audience, but you just want to tell other people that this is for you as well, you know. And that's kind of like, because the sport of baseball is going through a little bit of that right now. Back in the 90s, like I remember being a baseball fan in the 90s, and we had Kenny Lofton and Deion Sanders and David Justice and just all of these awesome baseball players. And then by the 2000s, there's less and less Black people wanting to play baseball. And WWE, they've got the talent. AEW has the talent. The Indies, the talent is there. It's just wrestling is going to have to evolve to something where you're including more people, and you're not treating like, even with like women wrestlers, it's important that you feature the roles that you feature people in are just as important as featuring them, period. That like AEW does, they used to do this thing where if they didn't have any idea of what they wanted to do with a wrestler, they would just be on dark all the time. I actually didn't mind that. Like, I know other people did. I didn't mind it because at least they're not on TV losing all the time. WWE has this weird thing. And I don't know if it's going to be like this in the Nick Khan Triple H era, but they have this thing where they just put talented people on television, and if they don't have anything to do with them, it's just, let's have them lose every week. So it's a lot of different things. It's a cultural thing. It's the main event. Like, any I think no matter what your race is, if you're looking at the WrestleMania season, I think most fans want to see, most hardcore fans, let me rephrase that, want to see probably Seth Rollins and CM Punk on night one, maybe Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns on night two. But if you're telling good stories, Black people are just going to gravitate, and then once they gravitate, you have to make sure you're pushing the Black wrestlers. This goes for both companies.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned baseball uh
Mhm.
as this thing where baseball, it's still going on, but it was this huge issue with baseball used to be, if you go back to like, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, tons of star black players. Every team
Right,
had
yeah.
several star black players.
Mhm.
And for a variety of reasons, that's no longer the case. And it's this real concern about, is baseball on its way to becoming like kind of like hockey, where it can still be popular, but it can be totally in this own niche that a lot of people will have no idea, couldn't name any players or anything like that. Um, and this is something I think like white people have a hard time understanding because their experience is so much
Mhm.
different in the
Yeah.
sense of like someone being turning on TV and seeing someone that looks like you. Something
Right,
that
yeah.
white people don't think about ever. And I remember
Yep.
reading, this is like when I was a kid, I was probably like 14, reading an article in Sports Illustrated uh,
Okay.
about um it
Okay.
was about baseball and the decline of baseball and black players in baseball. And I remember as a kid being
Yeah.
like, I don't really understand it. Why does this guy care that Gary Sheffield was black? Like, couldn't he just like a
Right, yeah.
baseball player? And that's something that never, as I got older, I began to understand why that's important. And um, maybe, I don't know, like, is this the case? Like, if you go back in wrestling, even though a lot of the portrayals of black people in wrestling historically have not aged particularly well,
Yeah, I
um,
think, yeah.
but even though still, being a place where you could see black people on TV, where maybe that was less common, is a factor. I remember I had a friend who's older guy, not even a wrestling fan,
Hmm.
and he's Iranian, and it was right after the Iron Sheik died, and he said
Yeah.
something like, "Oh yeah, like the Iron Sheik, he was like a hero to me when I was a kid because he was the outside of the Ayatollah, he was the only Iranian they ever showed on television."
Right.
And it's like, even though he was portraying like a really stereotypical, in a lot of ways you could consider harmful character, this guy still had very fond memories of him because he was like the only, person that was, like him, that was speaking Farsi uh on television. And I don't know if
Right.
that's, I mean, obviously
No,
there's,
yeah, that's a thing right there, right? And that's because that's what happens with me when I was a kid. I liked all the stereotypical wrestlers and stuff. It's just when you grow older and sensibilities change, it's you got to evolve with the times. And I think that WWE hasn't been the greatest at doing that. And then that's where you get these people, that these comics that get oh, I'm getting canceled, and I'm just telling jokes and stuff, and they're just so like lost that they can't even like um update their material. It's one of those kinds of situations, and it's not like we weren't it's we that stuff bought us into wrestling, but now to keep us in wrestling, to get the new crop of fans, people are not putting up with that nonsense the way they're doing in the this nonsense that we tolerated in the 80s is just not going to be the same for the 2020s. It's and if you don't understand that, then you got to kind of get out of the business, right?
Mhm. And I think that comes back to I think in AEW at least the talent is allowed to be more authentically themselves. They are
Right.
not like, and I think one of the reasons I think Swerve's character is hitting is because not only is Swerve happen to be black, but Swerve's character is very urban. He's, this hip
Yeah,
hop
yeah.
mogul.
He's not a caricature. He's kind of being his authentic self, and
Yeah.
kind of at this moment being the best version of himself, even with him doing this stuff with Hangman Page and all of that.
Well, he's a
So
wrestler, so he's still got to be
right.
like, is it, but he
Yeah,
feels like much more like a real person, and he feels like somebody as opposed to WWE historically, a
right,
lot of the characters that anyone that was really like anyone is being portrayed in this very cartoonish, over the top manner.
right.
And that's definitely true for talent of color. But even not
Yeah.
like I always think like Vince's idea for somebody when he ever feels like they're not getting over as much was for them to just become more foreign or
Yeah, more
exaggerate
forward,
whatever
more
they are. Like
well, Jinder Mahal, don't get me
yeah,
started,
well,
man.
you can even look at like Drew, like when there was like some trepidation about Drew
They gave her the
becoming the champion,
sword.
like he's got to paint himself like Braveheart, and he's got to have a
Yeah,
sword, and he's got to tell a story. Like he's it's like of stories of Scottish folklore. It's like, yeah, just
yeah,
become more Scottish.
yeah,
Any
more ethnic.
yeah, any
Yeah,
wrestler that's ever been from the UK or Ireland has to pretend they're a king at some point. Usually they win King of the Ring, but then they have to become, whether it's Regal or Sheamus or Wade Barrett, they're all a king at some point because that's
right.
how Vince has always seen these people. Anyone who's a little bit different than a Anglo-Saxon American has to be this
Right.
exaggerated version, and hopefully that's different now that Vince seems to be out of really any significant creative decision making.
Mhm.
But I still feel like that kind of lingers in wrestling, this old school belief of like exaggerate these personal traits that you have, even if it's completely inauthentic to that individual.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a problem in wrestling. So it's there's so much I could say about that. I do have to go. I have to have blood drawn at my house in a minute, so
Oh
I
yeah,
have to cut this short. But yeah, this is yeah, the very interesting conversation, and yeah, we could literally talk about this for hours. I hope you have me back on. I hope you come on my podcast and we could talk about this a lot more.
anytime.
All right, and
Um,
then
do you
yeah.
have anything you want to plug before you run?
Oh, there's the NWA podcast. I'm writing a book, but that's not going to be out for a while, so we'll get into all of that. Um, and yeah, man, just thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Kris. I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking about this subject. I think this is was a great conversation, and I'm sure the response will be very well for my listeners, and hopefully they check out your podcast. And I'd love to be on your show. You're welcome to come back on mine anytime. But thanks a lot, and for all my listeners, I'll thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you again after a while. Thanks.
I appreciate it. All right,